right. Wow. This is an exciting conversation. I've been looking forward to this so much.
Me too.
Okay. Well, actually, first of all, round of applause. Who's enjoying this so far? Yeah? Well, I'm having a great time. This conference so far, we've heard so much about the opportunity, right? We've also heard a lot about the heart call. I opened up with the heart, and then we went into the mind, the intellect, the rational opportunities of how, possibly there are opportunities there for you. And now this discussion, I want to focus on the hands. I want to get practical. I want to get real with someone who is doing all of the practical challenges and nuances of finding people, placing people, and seeing how they succeed or not. Okay, we're talking major cultural shifts and transitions and so forth. So first of all, and I want to ask about your own journey first, right? As also an OVIA and, your corporate experience, and then how you became an incredible mompreneur, okay, with 3 children. So could you tell us a little bit about your journey?
Thank you, Chị Thảo, and thank you very much, everybody, for still being here today until this time. I know it's long. So just a little bit of introductions about me. I actually just flew into Melbourne last night, so still on a different time zone.
We're on the same flight.
Yeah, we're on the same flight. That's right. Still on a different time zones, and really enjoy Melbourne so far. First time here, believe it or not. I was actually born and raised in Vietnam. I left Vietnam when I was about 15 years old. I was in the U.S. for most of my, maturity, teenagers, and then college and universities and all of that. And I worked a few years in the U.S. I came back to Vietnam in 2012. I started with RMIT when I first came back to Vietnam in their marketing department. And then after that, I was with a British company. I was their regional head of talent acquisitions for British American Tobacco. And then after that, a few years later, I moved to Techcombank, which is one of the largest private banks in Vietnam. The bank that Anh Luân used to work for was not Techcombank, so thank God. So I was with Techcombank as their vice president HR and head of talent acquisitions. And after 2.5 years, I started Janus. So that's where I am. And throughout all of that, I also gave birth to 3 children, 11, 6, and 3.
Round of applause for that. Hello. Oh my God. Wow. What an inspiring story. So I first want to know, when you moved back to Vietnam and worked yourself, what were the biggest adjustment challenges that you had to make? Because even though you spent your formative years in Vietnam, you did spend so much time abroad. So when you just moved back, I think a lot of people talk about culture shock, right? What do you think challenged you the most and required? What was required of you in order to be effective in Vietnam for yourself?
Right. So I think when I first came back to Vietnam, because I was living in the US for a while, and then I was also living in Europe for some years as well. So in me, there was the mixture of different cultures in me. And I think when I first got back to Vietnam, that's reverse cultural shock was a bit harder for me to adapt. I think if you look me up on some of the newspaper, they talk about my first period of moving back to Vietnam. I couldn't find a job for 4 to 5 months, and I was so depressed. I remember that I was crying with my husband every night. I was like, how come, with types of profile that I have that I cannot find a job in Vietnam. It's so depressing. But it was because, I did not have that heritage of, I did not have a time to build up my network during the former years and during my universities or during my previous career life, because I was always abroad. So finding the right network in that marketplace was one of the first challenge when I got back to Vietnam. And then luckily, I think I still enjoy my time very much with RMIT. I still have lots of friends there. And then with RMIT, I kind of found myself back. Because, it was the place where, there was an interconnection between, the Western culture and also the Vietnamese culture. So you kind of found that back. But the reverse culture shock was still there. It was about how people communicate, the high context in the Vietnamese working place. You have to know people to get things done. It's not a very transparent communications within the corporate. You kind of know where to ask, know who to ask, and when to ask. So it's a lot of navigation through that context that I've learned throughout my first few years of working in Vietnam.
Yeah, wow. And how fantastic that you were able to find almost like a landing pad in RMIT that could, I guess, induct you into Vietnam in a way. In our previous sessions, we heard some, advice and different ways of expressing the different cultural values in Vietnam. And interestingly, there's a lot of companies that move executives and move people into a country, and they prepare housing. They prepare, schools for the children. They prepare a lot of different things, but they don't prepare for cultural intelligence. And the reverse is interesting too. When people study from Vietnam to go to abroad, they look at IELTS testing, they prepare all these things in housing, and the number one thing pre and post in terms of the difficulties is, from a data perspective, this has been completely researched, is the cultural intelligence and adapting. And that completely, from a pre-departure sense, is completely missing, And so we've talked a lot about, the opportunities. And I think there is an assumption that is made from a recruitment perspective, sometimes from employers, is that as soon as they see an overseas Vietnamese, they're like, oh yes, this person can make it. This is the bicultural dream and bridge that we are looking for. Now, I've personally worked with companies where that has not been the case. They've just seen their ethnicity is Vietnamese, and they've had significant time in a Western country, and they immediately assumed that person is going to succeed in the role in Vietnam. So I suspected it. So I wanted to ask you, Ang, for those who come back, especially as OVs, what are the typical frustrations and challenges that they come to you with, during probation? And the second is, what do you think are the critical differences between OVs who end up being effective and those who aren't?
Right. Very great question, Chị Cát Thảo. I think I must say that even though today is very exciting, a lot of the topics and the speakers are very exciting, one thing that makes me very sad is that when we have a questions to ask the audience, how many of you are thinking of going back to Vietnam, I only see about 3 to 4 hands. It's really sad because we did these sessions and everywhere around the world where the Vietnamese community is large, and the raised of hands has always been more than 50% in the audience. So what is it that the overseas Vietnamese in Australia do not want to come back to Vietnam? And how, quote, a stat that we hire a lot of overseas Vietnamese to Vietnam over the past 4 years, and the proportion of the overseas Vietnamese coming from Australia is actually the lowest in our portfolio. Think about that for a bit. and why, right? Now, I'm going to talk a bit more about why and what we see. I think when overseas Vietnamese, when we looked at overseas Vietnamese populations, we categorized them in basically 3 types, right? There is OV, where you are only Vietnamese by your last name. Everything else is not. You know what that means, right? You were born and raised the entire time in a foreign country, do not even speak Vietnamese. You look half of your face Vietnamese and the other half is not. So that's type number 1. Number 2 is you were born and raised in Vietnam and then you left when you were younger, but you still maintain that heritage, that language, that connection to the country. And then the third one is we call the study abroad Vietnamese, which means, you were born and raised and grew up in Vietnam until you reached your university years, and then you went to, you go abroad. So there are 3 types of Vietnamese. And so can you give a guess which types is the most successful one in Vietnam? Type number 1 is just Vietnamese by the name. Type number 2 is Vietnamese, I would say overseas Vietnamese. That's born and raised in Vietnam, left early age. And then type number 3, it's a study abroad.
Okay, how about do a hand, show of hands. The first, who thinks the most effective? The one only by name. Yeah, okay, no, okay. Number 2, the group who's probably like me, who came when I was very young, and would they be the most effective in Vietnam? Anyone, that group? Okay, very small, like less than 5. And then the third, the study abroad.
Study abroad.
Group. Okay, so what do you think? What is it?
The misperception is there's no correlation. There's no correlation between these 3 groups. And I say why? Because I think most of the time, the overseas Vietnamese, when they have gone out of Vietnam, and the population who wants to come back to Vietnam carry with them a purpose beyond just job hopping. And I think that makes them more likely to succeed in Vietnam. Now, if you just look at Vietnam as, one of the places where you change jobs or you do a career hopping, maybe that won't keep you long because you can get very easily frustrated and a lot of things are different. But if you carry with you a purpose, that yearning of wanting to reconnect with the country, wanted to do something meaningful in your career, of wanted to, contribute to a growing story of a country where you have relationship with, then that purpose really keep them there. So to answer the second part of your question is, what makes them successful is, out of, hundreds of people we placed in Vietnam, the one that stayed the most, is the one who comes with that purpose. And I think that purpose will keep you going very far when you come to Vietnam. Now, frustrations, what do we see in Vietnam? Have you ever driven a car or a bicycle motorbikes in Vietnam? Have anyone ever? How many people have driven in Vietnam? Okay, great. All right. So why I say that is because the traffic in Vietnam represents exactly how the workplace in Vietnam looks like.
Love it.
Right? You have so many bikes, so many cars coming at once, no rules, people signaling on the left, turning on the right, people coming out of, the hem, the little alleys without warning. People can go very fast and then suddenly stopped for no reason. Then you see a car, going backtrack on a freeway, those kind of crazy things that represents, how the corporate in Vietnam works. Right. It's very chaotic, it's very messy, it's really fast and slow at the same time, and it's very unpredictable. So I think if a lot of you have driven in Vietnam and you're still alive until today, I think you have a very high chance of being successful when you move back to Vietnam. So yeah, so I think that would be the key characteristics of a workplace in Vietnam. And I think it's also talk about the frustration. If you come to Vietnam and complain about the traffic, then don't come.
Yeah.
Right? It's the same with if you come to Vietnam and work in a workplace and you complain about the chaotics, about the unstructure, about the ambiguity, then you can't work there. So you have to come with that mindset that this is what you sign up for, and this is the experience that you want to have. So I think that's, the key things I wanted to get across is that, it's really different from, how you imagine the corporate would look like. Of course, as Vietnam's economy is maturing, I think we'll see more of, more mature companies coming into, a more structured and transparent and, and well-established corporate governance. But until then, that's the landscape. And I think the exciting part about that is that if you come back during this period, is actually the golden period where you can make the contribution to make Vietnam moving towards that stage of being more aligned, more transparent, more, professional, more aligned with the global standards. And I think that's the opportunities.
Yeah. Wow. Awesome. So, in terms of that who could succeed or be more effective, the critical factor is not the category of the Vietnamese or your background, it's actually what is your drive. So I became the first person certified in cultural intelligence in Vietnam by the Cultural Intelligence Institute in Michigan. And when they talk about cultural intelligence, there's 4 elements. The first is drive. What is your motivation? The second is knowledge. And then the third is strategy, and the fourth is action, to implement that. So the foundational piece there is the drive. If you don't have the drive, you will not persist with the knowledge, you will not persist with the strategy, you will not persist with the action. So I completely concur with that. And the traffic thing is a really interesting analogy about, working in Vietnam. When the number of accidents is extremely small for the level of activity and population. Now, when you look at that traffic, you think that it's chaos and stuff, but you know what it's actually called? The theory of mutual adjustment. If you actually look at a school of fish and the way they move and you're there, they come close, but they actually mutually adjust and they won't touch you. So when I was on a panel with the Australia-Vietnam Leadership Dialogue, the chairman of KPMG Australia, the chairman of KPMG New South Wales, he said to me, about my experience in Vietnam and so forth. He asked the question and I said, it has challenged and utilized every single cell of skills and untapped skills I have. If I stayed in Australia, because it's very it's more developed in terms of legal infrastructure and ways of working and stuff, it never could have grown or accelerated me as a professional in the same pace. So what I experienced as a young professional there, I could not have accelerated in Australia in the same way, but it would have been a sink or swim situation, Yeah. And if there are, you've recruited so many people into the country, is there anything you want to share about the hiring process that people should be aware of? And any tips, if they do have that drive, say they want to, they do want to go, and this is a golden time to contribute. It's a historic time for the nation, like bridges are being built every 2 seconds, things that in Australia we take for granted, electrification, water, infrastructure, metro. Here in Australia, it's like, oh, someone built that how many years ago? You don't know who built that. You are the beneficiary of all that. But in Vietnam, we see this coming alive in front of our faces. It is an incredible time to be contributing to an incredible nation. So for the people who have that drive, what would you want to say to them, and practical tips or the recruitment or what have you?
Right. I often get asked a lot about the hiring process. And the funny part about, big Vietnamese conglomerates in Vietnam is that is that there's no fixed hiring process, right? There are multiple stakeholders involved in the conversations, and that can change. Sometimes, if the first person you meet is straight away the chairman, that's the only things you will meet in the hiring process, and bam, you got a job offer. But sometimes it's get very lengthy and you go through a lot of people. But I would say that one of the things that I always encourage people is, is to keep a very flexible and open mindset when you enter into any hiring process in Vietnam, because it can change as the position, it can change as the situation, it can also change as the stakeholder change as well. And don't ask for a JD. There is no JD, and I think we've hired, we've worked with some of the top companies in Vietnam, from Techcombank, VP, Vingroup, Masan's group. All of them are top companies in Vietnam, and the majority of the jobs that we worked on have no JD. We literally have a two-sentence briefing from the chairman or the CEO, and then there. Go find them. So that's the mindset that you also have to take into account, that not everything is straightforward, not everything is clear. And when you come in and you talk to them and you build your JD, you build your scope of work, and that's where they wanted your skill set. That's where they want your insight. And sometimes, once they enter into a hiring, they just know that they need that person, but they don't know what skill sets, what mindsets, what responsibility should be. So you build that together with them. So I think that collaboration in the process is very critical, and it's critical in everything you will do when you enter into the corporate. Don't expect them to come to you with a clear requirement and and specifications. Build that together with them, and that's, I think, how you will add values into the Vietnamese corporate. Yeah, and another thing I wanted to add is that one of the things that I found very challenging for us when we hire overseas Vietnamese in Australia, or any talents from Australia market, is that requirement for work-life balance. Any of you want to have a work-life balance in your life? Yeah, of course, everybody wants a work-life balance, right? But I would say that the definition of work-life balance in Vietnam is very different from how you would think about work-life balance, right? In here, we often, once I have this very funny story that, one time we were here collaborating with a very big banks in Vietnam to do recruitment, right? And then the majority of the candidate we spoke to asked, "Oh, can we go home at 4 o'clock? 4 p.m. Can we go home at 4 p.m.? Or, are you open for, working from home and all of that?" And of course, the answer is no, right? But what I'm saying is, in Vietnam, the concept of work-life balance is defined very differently. And in there, if you really wanted to make, your case in Vietnam and really wanted to be successful in a Vietnamese conglomerate, you really have to have that mindset of being resilient and, and work really hard and long hour. And that's a reality. And why is it long hour? Is because there is a huge gap between the ambition of these company and the readiness of the system, the readiness of the people, the readiness of the process and legal. Not because they wanted to drain your energy, not because they are evil and do not want you to have a personal life, but because of that gap between the corporate ambitions, the business ambitions versus the readiness of whatever is on the ground. So that's the reason why people who enter into that boat have to row maybe twice or 5 times stronger and longer than all the corporates. Yeah. So I think that's something I wanted to add as a ugly truth as well.
Well, thank you so much, and I think that's what's really important is people to have eyes wide open, understand, and works a lot with Vietnamese local companies, right? Big Vietnamese companies, but there are also NABs, right? There's also international companies. I think what's really important is to have your own deeper self-awareness of yourself and to make choices that work for you. Right? If there's high risk profile and you can, you're adventurer, then find the thing that works for you, right? That's really important. Your story No one else's story. Yeah. I'd like to just, thank Anne for her amazing work in Vietnam. She's doing extremely important work. And, inspiring person, inspiring mom. And thank you so much for the insights of this conversation.
Thank you very much. And I do hope that I'll see more hands raising up to come back to Vietnam after today.
Come back.